Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome here to the Royal Society this evening. My name's John Nagg. I'm Head of Research and Consultancy for English and Examinations at the British Council. We're going to talk about the language itself, the English language. And this event is a joint event between the British Council and the Oxford English Dictionary. Anything from the audience on the whole issue of regulation of external regulation of language or foreign imports into England? And the gentleman at the back there in the middle, about 3 rows from the back.
The excitement of the English changing is wonderful. No one has yet mentioned social media and the speed with which Facebook and the young people who are actually doing all this social media. Facebook currently claim that it's just coming up to 1 billion users, and they are all using English, and they are having a remarkable effect.
And there was another lady just behind the gentleman at the corner there, next to Melissa.
I'd like to ask you what English actually is, given the fact that it is spoken in so many different countries, and shouldn't it be relabeled to reflect its different strands? I mean, the English spoken in Singapore, for example, varies greatly from the one spoken in England or Wales or Scotland.
But anything to on those issues that's been brought up?
Well, I think where social media are concerned, one of the things which I would say, having done quite a lot of research into the history of arguments about English usage, is a lot of the things that have worried people most in the past, the worry hasn't actually been justified. I'm not a particularly active user of Facebook, but I do use it, and I don't notice English being used on Facebook in particularly innovative or unorthodox ways, because Facebook doesn't constrain you to be concise. It's much more, for instance, on Twitter, where there's a constraint as regards the length of what you can say, that you get people innovating and using more abbreviations. But actually, it seems to me that what we need to recognise here is people use language in different ways in different contexts. Just because I use abbreviations on Twitter or in a text message doesn't mean I import those into every other area of my life. We do it all the time. Linguists call it code switching. I use a different form of English when I'm speaking to you now and when I'm writing and when I'm in a job interview from what I use when I'm getting a kebab at 3 o'clock in the morning in Turnpike Lane. And it's probably in my interests to do that. And we all do it, though we may not catch ourselves in the act of doing it. It can be modifying our vocabulary because we're talking to a child or someone that we recognise is not a native speaker. It may be moderating my accent for fear of getting thumped at the football, things like that. We all do it, and I don't necessarily see, even if social media are propagating somewhat distinct forms of the language, that they are going to sort of titrate into the mainstream of English. I don't think that necessarily happens. I think we all carry around within us variant forms, and it's perfectly viable to use what some people might regard as a debased form and to use English in the most elevated form.
I think on the social media thing, I think it doesn't have as much effect. I mean, on Twitter, I suppose really people aren't saying so much as pointing, really. That's all that seems to happen. When text started, I suppose people did a lot of abbreviation. But for me to abbreviate something seems to take a lot longer than just the predictive spelling that comes through. My phone has a much bigger vocabulary than me, and it seems to know exactly what I want to say whenever I want to say it. So that's no problem there. The restriction was to be concise at one point, and I used to try to be very concise. So it was very, very much like writing telegrams until my children said, why are you so rude on your text messages? And they showed me how to put a smiley face on it. So now it's full of smiley faces and nothing else really. But I think being concise is probably quite a good thing, actually. There's no harm in being concise. I'm not being concise now at all because I'm not texting this, but never mind on that side. But the spelling thing, you mentioned at the back, to simplify spelling. But I think that happens naturally. Some people are appalled by the way it gets simplified, but I think it does get simplified.
But I want to do something which is probably going to annoy John, and which is actually to pick up on a very important question which was asked earlier, which is probably built into John's structure of this, but it's about this question of different varieties of English. I just don't want that to get overlooked. It seems to me English is not something monolithic, and when we speak of English as if it's something single and unified, that's a necessary fiction. The reality is that there is a whole family of Englishes, including Singapore English and British English, and within British English, different variants, and obviously Liberian English is something very different from Canadian English, and so on and so forth. And one of the things that we need to recognise is that this may not even be true for most people in this room, but if you're a British native speaker of English, it doesn't mean you own English. Nobody owns English, and there are far more people in the world who are not British English speakers but do speak English than there are British English speakers. I express that incredibly badly, but I'm sure you understand my point. Ever since British people started firing English into places all over the rest of the world, we've no longer had a monopoly on dictating how it should be.
Can I just pick up on that? Because I was brought up in darkest Somerset. Everybody in the village where I lived spoke 2 languages. When they spoke to their friends and families, they spoke Broad. When they spoke to anyone that they think wouldn't understand them, they spoke proper. And they all spoke Broad and proper.
Yeah.
And everyone could understand them.
Emma Thompson went back to her old girls' school, I think it was Camden Girls' School, a couple of years ago, and was appalled at the innits and likes, and made the point that that wasn't very sensible when they were talking to her in an official capacity, and that, in fact, everyone needed 2 languages, one to speak in an official capacity,
I think it's
one
true.
to speak with your mates,
Yes.
she said.